Welcome back. You're watching News Center, and we're discussing the ramifications of an American court blocking Trump's tariffs. Now, in an attempt to justify those tariffs, the Trump administration cited the recent ceasefire between India and Pakistan in a submission to the court. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said, and I quote, "This ceasefire was only achieved after President Trump interceded and offered both nations trading access with the United States to avert a full-scale war," end of quote. Lutnick went on to say that any adverse ruling will constrain presidential power and could lead to India and Pakistan questioning Trump's offer, which in turn threatens the security of the entire region. However, the judge did not accept this argument and ruled that sweeping tariffs invoking an emergency law was a case of executive overreach. I beg your pardon. Joining us now to take this discussion ahead are with us two of India's former External Affairs Secretaries, Ambassador R. Kanwal Sibal, as well as Ambassador KC Singh. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Ambassador Sibal, let me come to you first. It's one thing, Trump is known to be a loose cannon. He's known to make comments which surprise, which shock, which bring in a sense of awe. But now to be making those statements in a formal court of law in the United States, in diplomatic terms, knowing that this comes at the cost of India's stated position repeatedly after Operation Sindoor, in diplomatic terms, what does this translate into, Ambassador Singh?
I think you asked him as a symbol.
Well, I think this is almost visible. It just shows how inept and U.S. diplomacy has become, where they can actually communicate total nonsense to the court. I mean, saying that the ceasefire has been based on giving access to India and Pakistan to U.S. trade. What kind of nonsense is this? We already have over $200 billion of trade with the United States. Are they going to block that because of what happened between India and Pakistan? And how would they block that? They export to us, we export to them. We already have agreed on the broad parameters of a multi-sector trade agreement, which we are negotiating. This has been officially announced even by the US Vice President who was here. Our Commerce Secretary Commerce Minister was in the United States fairly recently. The negotiations are going on well. I have inquired with the powers that be, and they say that there is absolutely no impact of what Trump has been talking about trade in the context of the India-Pakistan conflict on actual discussions that are going on, which are proceeding pretty smoothly. So I don't know. They're just clutching at straws and bringing up a security issue, a ceasefire issue to the U.S. court as if it has to decide on these matters is almost ridiculous. It's almost ridiculous. And moreover, the government of India at various levels has categorically said that the trade issue was never mentioned. Remember, it is Vance who spoke to our Prime Minister, and Rubio spoke to our Foreign Minister, and it has been made very clear from our side that there was no reference to trade at all. So, you know, one should take all this seriously because it has no basis at all.
All right. Ambassador Singh, let me come to you. Like Ambassador Sibal was pointing out, there doesn't appear to be any basis. That appears to have been a sentiment that even the U.S. court agrees with, rejecting that argument and in doing so striking down the Trump tariffs as well. Given that we are operating now in the domain of the Trump era, the tariff era, give us a sense, what does this change do with the U.S. court rejecting the argument about the India-Pakistan ceasefire, with the U.S. court also striking down the Trump tariffs? What does that do for trade negotiations, especially with countries like India, who, at least for now, are not seeing eye to eye with the U.S.?
You know, this is an important U.S. tribunal. It's the Tribunal on International Trade. And what they have said is the 1979 law that the Trump administration is using was meant really for sanctions against countries or other trade-related issues, but certainly not tariffs. So what Trump administration have done is they've taken that law and assumed the power to impose tariffs arbitrarily. And it happens almost, he goes to sleep with the tariffs with China at level X, he wakes up next morning, lowers them. They keep going up and down. The markets keep going up and down. So there is no rationale to it. But I think what they're doing is he's convinced that tariffs are a very effective weapon in his hands to influence other countries and therefore set right what he thinks are distortions in multilateral trade. Now they've combined it in case of India with security issues. So it's more a question of thinking that for them tariff is the main weapon. And so wherever they're wielding it, they think it's useful even where India-Pakistan standoff is concerned. So I think it's mistaken. And secondly, as Ambassador Sibal said, our trade is around $200 billion. Pakistan's trade is $5 or $6 billion. So there's no comparison at all. What is it they propose doing for Pakistan, which can help their trade or which can harm their trade? Maybe they can harm their trade, but certainly can't help them much. But this is not the first time. Even Trump, standing next to the South African president, again said it. And before that, he's also said it. So it's somewhere stuck in his head. I don't think it's a one-off that they went to a court and they said it. But somewhere in his mind, there is this use of tariffs as a weapon to influence any country to do whatever he wants it to do, whether it's security-related issues or trade or anything else, or visas or fentanyl, as in case of Canada and Mexico. Canada doesn't have a trade imbalance with America, but they're saying, no, you are exporting fentanyl and you're letting people come in, which is not based on facts. With Mexico, again, it's fentanyl and people coming through. So the issues vary. It is not a single issue. Issues vary from country to country, and tariff is the one weapon that Trump is wielding. So I think we can just ignore what he's saying. But the problem is that the Indian government has shown a certain reluctance to openly confront the US administration. I think there is a hope that somehow the trade deal with America will come through. The initial a kind of an interim trade deal is expected very soon. I think we may be disappointed because with Trump, nothing can be taken for granted. Even what is on the table, you may just say, no, it is not acceptable. It's not something which doesn't meet all my conditions. But that puts the government on the back foot because they have not openly confronted the Americans on this argument. We do it indirectly, we do it sort of reject it, but we've not, every time they've raised it, we've not openly said that, please don't use this, this has nothing to do with it. And I think that's what makes them perpetuate and go on with it.
Let me then ask a supplementary question, Ambassador Singh, that when you say that India has not done enough as a show of strength in terms of rebutting some of these claims that are made repeatedly by President Trump, what more is required at this stage in terms of taking a substantial position that manifests not just to Indians but also to the world at large, that look, this is a position that we clearly refute, that this is not something that transpired, this is not a narrative that India will stand by?
Well, Foreign Secretary is in Washington at the moment. He should take it up. He's gone to discuss critical technologies and so on and so forth. I think before we behave as if it's business as usual, there has to be some intervention on his part and tell the Americans, please stop it. We can't continue with business as usual. It's causing domestic issues in India. And you've got 7 delegations which are going all over the world. Even they'll be wondering, even countries they are engaging will be wondering what's happening. Because when you're explaining, you are trying to bring the focus back on Pakistani terrorism, Pakistan-sponsored terrorism. And Trump goes on shifting it, creating equivalence between India and Pakistan, and introducing trade into it, and recreating a hyphenation, which doesn't help our arguments abroad.
Sure. Ambassador Sibal, let me come to you. Again, on the issue of the trade deal, all of this is happening in the midst of India negotiating a trade deal with the United States. There was an understanding that perhaps before the end of 2025, it could yield some returns. The question I want to ask you is that if we were to continue along this current trajectory, with the overarching tariffs that we had seen, India was seen required to make concessions. So whether that's bourbon whiskey from Tennessee, whether that's Harley-Davidson bikes, we were required to make those concessions. Now with the tariffs having gone, is this a trade deal? Is this a lever that perhaps the Indian administration can now use to send a message to the United States? There are sticky points, whether that's defense buys, whether that's IP protection, whether that's MSPs that we provide to our local crops here in India. So there are sticky points. Can they now be used as levers perhaps in conveying the Indian message?
I think we should continue down the path that we are following and try and have some kind of an agreement, an interim agreement, the first phase of a larger trade agreement by autumn this year, as had been planned when Prime Minister Modi went to United States in February. As I mentioned earlier, my understanding is that those talks are going on well enough, and we should continue, unless, of course, the basis of the talks is completely eroded by the American side and they want something else altogether, or they introduce issues which are not acceptable to us. So far, that is not happening. The point is that if we want to increase the levels of our trade to $500 billion with the United States by 2030, then some changes in our tariff regime would also be required, as against which we should have more access to the United States in terms of technology, investment, or what have you. It has to be a win-win deal. So why stop this process midway just because of the ruling or whatever it is? Because in the US system, you don't know which way the wind will blow and what next may happen. And as you said, that this matter is going to go to the Supreme Court, which will ultimately decide. So why anticipate anything? Unless, as I said, the Americans are putting roadblocks, which we find totally unacceptable. There's a much larger relationship with the United States that we need to preserve, and it goes beyond tariffs. Unfortunately, Trump is absolutely fixated on tariffs at the cost of any sense of geopolitics. This is a big flaw in the American administration today, because you have a president who cannot think beyond tariffs, who makes loose statements, who makes unsubstantiated statements, and even on Indian tariffs and trade figures between India and the United States, he's totally ill-informed. He says whatever comes to his mind. And Lutnick again is not particularly well versed in these matters. I saw the statements he was making at the Lycina dialogue, where they were putting enormous pressure on us on agriculture, and he was pretty demanding in that regard. It's not going to happen. And then Trump says that India has agreed to zero tariffs. Are we going to agree to zero tariffs in agriculture? What nonsense is this? So, and coming back to all this talk about the ceasefire being under jeopardy because he had promised trade. What had he promised to India? What? Nothing. And why should we disregard what our leaders have said repeatedly? You mentioned just now that we should be more clear. How much more can we be clear? You said this. Why go on and get into a battle with Trump, who's totally unpredictable, who likes to always want to win, and he's very impulsive and unpredictable. And why rattle him quite unnecessarily? We've said what we have said, and there's no point in taking him head on. Just ignore him.
Sure. Right. We're running out of time, Ambassador Singh. Let me come to you for a quick final comment. Trump has repeatedly been making these comments, knowing that this is coming at the expense of the Indian position that, look, it's a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. A third party has no role. From a broader geopolitical standpoint, when you look at the truce that Donald Trump is trying to strike with countries such as China, is that a lens that deserves, that merits perhaps a look, that there is a broader game at play where India perhaps is the bargaining chip between US and China?
I think there should be no assumptions where Trump is concerned. The old game of India being very critical to America in terms of balancing China, I think we should just discard it for the time being, because with Trump, there are no givens. Also, you take these tariffs. Some of the tariffs are not under that law, which the court has struck down. For instance, on steel, aluminum, and cars, it's under the standard laws. So he will shift some of the tariffs to standard laws. This he was doing because there was no constraints. He didn't have to do any calculations, and you just top of your head said 50%, 70%, 100%. Whatever percent he wanted, he just went ahead. Problem is, the 90 days he gave the world are close to being over. And he said July will be 90 days, will be over. And he said in 90 days, he'll have 90 trade agreements. We don't see those trade agreements anywhere nearby. Somebody has said that he might be able to use this court decree to actually get away from the tariff thing. I doubt it very much, because he's stuck Otherwise, he's got an excuse now. He could say, look, the court didn't allow me to do it. I was going to reshape the global trade. And now I'm sorry, I've had to go back on that. He probably won't do that. So he will try shifting as much as he can to normal laws. He'll try challenging this. But I don't think we should take it for granted that India is considered as important by him as previous administrations have done as a balancer of which he just reduced the duties on Chinese products. But then he's gone after the Chinese students in America. He's gone after our students. So, there is not one front. Every morning he gets up, depends which side of the bed he has got up. He's got a new idea and starts implementing it without looking at the repercussions or implications of that. So I think we are in for volatile, troubled times, and we have to be used to it. And diplomacy will have to adjust literally on a day-to-day basis.
Right, Ambassador Singh. Ambassador Sibal, thank you so much for joining us, for giving us more color. Again, volatile times. Ambassador Singh pointing out that the statement coming from Donald Trump may, in a large part, depend on what side of the bed he wakes up on. So clearly, a lot of volatility for now. The U.S. court striking down the Trump tariffs. Trump clearly pointing out that there will be an appeal, and this will be a legal battle that he will engage in. So clearly, the final word is yet to be had as far as tariffs are concerned and as far as Donald Trump is concerned. But with that, it's a wrap on this edition of News Center. More news and updates will continue right here. Keep watching CNBC TV 18.